Just drop dead. I don't give a damn. Those words exploded from my son Tyler's mouth like a grenade going off in our living room. But here's what broke my heart the most. It wasn't the rage in his voice or the venom in his eyes. It was the cold, calculated way he said it, like he'd been rehearsing those words for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment to detonate our relationship completely. I stood there watching this 23-year-old stranger who used to be my little boy, and I realized that the son I'd raised was already dead. What stood before me now was something else entirely, a ghost possessed by greed, entitlement, and the toxic promises of a man who'd never even met him in person. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't even flinch when Tyler screamed at me to disappear from his life forever. Instead, I picked up my purse, grabbed my car keys, and walked toward the door with a calmness that seemed to unnerve him more than any emotional breakdown could have. As I reached for the handle, Tyler called out behind me, "That's right, just run away like you always do." But he was wrong about everything, especially that I wasn't running away because I was weak or broken or defeated. I was walking away because I'd finally become strong enough to let him destroy himself without taking me down with him. This nightmare had been building for 3 long months, ever since Tyler discovered what he called his financial mentor through a TikTok video that would change both our lives forever. The man went by Ryan Castellano, though I'm certain that wasn't his real name, and he had everything Tyler thought he wanted: expensive cars, thick stacks of cash, designer clothes, and most importantly, he had smooth answers for every excuse Tyler had ever made about why his life wasn't working out the way he'd planned. Tyler had been drifting since high school graduation 5 years earlier, jumping from one dead-end job to another, never lasting more than 3 months anywhere, before finding some reason to quit or get himself fired. He'd tried community college twice, but dropped out both times, claiming the professors didn't understand real-world business. He'd started and abandoned more business ideas than I could count, from selling energy drinks online to becoming a social media influencer with 12 followers to launching a cryptocurrency investment club that consisted entirely of himself. Each failure hit Tyler harder than the last, not because he learned from his mistakes, but because they challenged his fundamental belief that he was destined for greatness without having to work for it. He'd spent his entire adolescence being told he was special, gifted, and capable of amazing things. But nobody had ever taught him that potential means nothing without persistence, discipline, and the willingness to fail forward rather than just fail. That's exactly why Ryan's message hit Tyler like a drug he didn't know he'd been craving his entire life. This wasn't just another get-rich-quick scheme. It was a complete worldview that explained away every one of Tyler's failures and promised him everything he'd ever wanted without requiring him to change a single thing about himself. According to Ryan, Tyler wasn't a serial quitter with commitment issues. He was an entrepreneurial spirit, being held back by a society designed to keep natural leaders like him small and controllable. The mentor's first video that Tyler showed me was a masterclass in psychological manipulation disguised as motivational content. Ryan sat in what looked like a penthouse office, though I later discovered it was probably a rented space used for filming, wearing an expensive watch and speaking directly into the camera like he was sharing state secrets. "Money isn't real," he said with the confidence of someone who'd never missed a meal in his life. Confidence is the only currency that matters, and if your own family doesn't believe in your vision, they're not family. They're energy vampires sucking the success right out of your soul. Tyler played that video for me 3 times, rewinding his favorite parts and pausing to explain why Ryan's words were so revolutionary. I watched my son's eyes light up with the kind of fervor I'd only seen in documentaries about cult members describing their first encounter with their leader. This wasn't just admiration, it was worship. Ryan had given Tyler something more powerful than money or success. He'd given him permission to blame everyone else for his problems and feel superior while doing it. Within days, Tyler was repeating Ryan's catchphrases around our house like gospel verses. "Chores are minimum wage energy," he'd say when I asked him to help with dishes that had been piling up for 3 days. "If they're not investing in your vision, they're dead weight," became his response whenever I suggested he might want to contribute to household expenses or maybe look for actual employment. He'd started calling traditional jobs slave labor and referring to successful people as sheep who traded their dreams for security. The transformation was swift and total. Tyler stopped doing anything that resembled normal human responsibility. No more taking out trash, no more helping with groceries, no more basic courtesy toward the woman who'd been supporting him financially and emotionally for his entire adult life. He was too busy building his personal brand and developing his mindset to waste energy on what Ryan called low-frequency activities. Instead, Tyler would sleep until 2 or 3 in the afternoon, then stay awake all night in his room with the door locked, participating in what he called mastermind sessions with other aspiring entrepreneurs. I could hear him through the walls, shouting motivational slogans like, "Let's go, and we're changing the game," with the kind of enthusiasm most people reserve for their favorite sports team winning a championship. Except Tyler's team wasn't winning anything. They were just a collection of lost young men convincing each other that their shared delusions were actually business strategies. I tried to reason with him. I really did. I spent hours researching Ryan Castellano and his operation, and what I found made my stomach turn with dread. His website was a collection of stock photos, fake countdown timers, and testimonials that looked like they'd been generated by computer algorithms. The success stories featured people with usernames like Crypto King 2023 and profile pictures that had obviously been stolen from other websites. The whole thing screamed fraud from every possible angle. When I sat Tyler down and showed him the evidence, screenshots of the fake reviews, examples of how the countdown timers reset every few hours to create false urgency, comparisons between Ryan's luxury lifestyle photos and stock images I'd found online, Tyler didn't just dismiss my concerns. He laughed in my face with the kind of condescending amusement you'd show to a child who still believed in Santa Claus. "You're a hater, Mom," he said, using Ryan's exact terminology. "You're so stuck in scarcity mindset that you can't even recognize opportunity when it's right in front of you. This is exactly what Ryan warned us about, people who are so afraid of success that they'll try to tear down anyone who's brave enough to go after it." Tyler actually looked me in the eye and told me I was jealous of his entrepreneurial vision and didn't want to see him succeed because it would make my own life choices look pathetic by comparison. Those words cut deeper than any insult he could have hurled at me, not because they were cruel, but because Tyler genuinely believed them. He'd been so thoroughly programmed by Ryan's ideology that he couldn't see his own mother as anything other than an obstacle to overcome. In Tyler's new reality, I wasn't the woman who'd worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat after his father left. I wasn't the person who'd sacrifice vacations and new clothes and restaurant meals so Tyler could have everything he needed. I was just another energy vampire trying to drain his potential for greatness. That's when Tyler crossed the line that would change everything between us forever. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "You know what your problem is. Mom, you've been a loser your whole life, and you want me to be a loser too. But I'm not going to let your limiting beliefs hold me back anymore." He said it like raising him as a single mother was something shameful, like working honest jobs to pay for his food, his clothes, his car insurance, and his cell phone bill was evidence of my failure rather than my love. Tyler had forgotten, or chosen to forget, all those nights I skipped dinner so he could have seconds. All the times I drove across town to pick him up when he was stranded somewhere, no questions asked. All the birthday parties I threw with homemade decorations because store-bought ones weren't in the budget. All the school events I attended, even when I was exhausted from pulling double shifts at work. In his new worldview, none of that mattered because none of it aligned with Ryan's definition of success. The mentor had taught Tyler that gratitude was a low-vibration emotion that kept people trapped in mediocrity. According to Ryan's philosophy, successful people didn't waste energy being thankful for what they had. They focused entirely on what they deserved and went after it without apology. Tyler had internalized this message so completely that he'd lost the ability to see my sacrifices as anything other than proof that I'd settled for less than I should have demanded from life. And then came the theft that would destroy our relationship completely. I first noticed something was wrong when my bank sent me an alert about an unusually large transaction. $3,000 had been transferred from my checking account to something called Elite Success Partners, a company I'd never heard of and certainly never authorized. My heart started racing as I checked my online banking and saw another transfer for $5,000 to the same mysterious organization. When I stormed into Tyler's room, bank statements in hand, and my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and betrayal, he didn't even try to deny what he'd done. "Oh, you saw that," he said with casual indifference, like stealing $8,000 from your own mother was as normal as borrowing $5 for lunch. "It's an investment. Mom, don't worry. You'll get it back triple when my partnership deal goes through." Tyler actually had the audacity to act like I was the unreasonable one for being upset about the theft. He explained to me, with the patience of someone talking to a particularly slow child, that he'd used my saved banking information from an old laptop to make what he called a strategic investment in our family's future. In his mind, my money was really our money, and since I was too limited to see the opportunity Ryan was offering, Tyler had taken it upon himself to make the smart financial decision for both of us. I gave him 24 hours to reverse the transfers and return every penny he'd stolen. Instead of apologizing or scrambling to fix what he'd broken, Tyler got in my face and accused me of trying to sabotage his success. He said I was jealous that he was brave enough to take risks while I was content to stay broke forever. He called me a leech who was trying to steal his future, apparently forgetting that I was the one who'd been paying for his present for the past 5 years. That's when those final poisonous words came spilling out of Tyler's mouth like venom he'd been storing up for months. "Just drop dead. I don't give a damn," he screamed, and in that moment, I saw the truth that I'd been trying to deny for weeks. My son was gone. The person standing in front of me was a stranger who'd been completely consumed by greed, entitlement, and the false promises of a con artist who'd never even bothered to learn his real name. So I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I finally understood that this nightmare was ending. Tyler thought my smile meant I was weak, broken, or defeated. He had no idea that for the first time in months, I was strong enough to walk away from someone who'd rather destroy me than face the truth about himself. What Tyler didn't understand was that his precious mentor had been orchestrating this entire scam for years, perfecting it on hundreds of vulnerable young men just like my son. Ryan Castellano wasn't some spontaneous internet guru who'd stumbled into success. He was a professional predator who'd studied exactly what broken boys needed to hear and turned their desperation into his personal ATM machine. Every word he spoke, every promise he made, every piece of fake evidence he presented had been carefully crafted to hook people exactly like Tyler and drain them of everything they had. The operation started small and built systematically, like a spider spinning an increasingly complex web. Ryan's first contact point was always TikTok, where he'd post 30-second videos filled with just enough truth to seem credible, mixed with just enough fantasy to seem irresistible. He knew that young men who'd failed at traditional paths were scrolling social media at 2 a.m., looking for someone to tell them their failures weren't their fault and their dreams were still achievable without the hard work they'd been avoiding their entire lives. Ryan's videos followed the same psychological formula every time. First, he'd validate his audience's frustrations with statements like, "The system is designed to keep you small," and "Your parents were programmed to accept mediocrity." Then he'd offer hope with promises like, "I'm going to show you how to escape the matrix," and "Everything changes once you understand what I'm about to teach you." Finally, he'd create urgency with phrases like, "But only for the right kind of person," and "Most people aren't ready for this level of success." Tyler watched every single video Ryan posted, sometimes multiple times, taking screenshots of quotes that resonated with his wounded ego. The mentor had a supernatural ability to speak directly to Tyler's deepest insecurities while simultaneously making him feel chosen and special. Ryan would say things like, "College is for sheep who are afraid to think for themselves," which made Tyler feel better about dropping out twice. Or, "Traditional jobs are modern slavery," which justified Tyler's inability to hold steady employment for more than a few months. The genius of Ryan's approach was that he never promised easy money. Instead, he promised something far more valuable to someone like Tyler. He promised an identity. Ryan told his followers they weren't failures. They were alpha entrepreneurs being held back by a world that feared their potential. They weren't lazy. They were too advanced for conventional work structures. They weren't broke. They were temporarily liquid poor while building generational wealth. When Ryan announced his exclusive mentorship program, Tyler was ready to throw money at him before he even understood what he was purchasing. The sales page looked professional enough to fool someone who desperately wanted to be fooled. There were countdown timers creating false urgency, testimonials from people with suspicious usernames like Wealth Builder 2024 and Success Hunter, with profile photos that looked suspiciously computer-generated, and bold claims about turning small investments into six-figure returns using information the financial elite don't want you to know. I begged Tyler to wait, to research the company, to ask for references or proof of Ryan's claimed success. Real businesses don't need countdown timers and fake urgency, I told him, pulling up examples of legitimate investment firms and showing him how they presented their services. But Tyler didn't want logic or evidence. He wanted to feel special, chosen, different from all the other losers working regular jobs and living ordinary lives. Ryan had mastered the art of making his marks feel like insiders while keeping them completely in the dark about how the scam actually worked. He would tell Tyler things like, "You're exactly the type of high-value individual I partner with long-term," and "I can see you have real alpha energy that most people lack." These weren't just compliments. They were psychological hooks designed to make Tyler feel like he'd been personally selected for greatness rather than randomly targeted for exploitation. The first payment was strategically small, just $97 for what Ryan called a Mindset Foundation course. It was nothing but a poorly written PDF filled with recycled motivational quotes and basic business terminology you could find in any library book. But Tyler treated that document like it contained the secrets of the universe, highlighting passages and reading them aloud to anyone who would listen. He started calling himself a digital entrepreneur and told everyone he was building passive income streams through value creation. When I asked Tyler to explain what those terms actually meant in practical application, he would roll his eyes and say things like, "It's about leveraging scalable systems to optimize cash flow." Mom, you wouldn't understand because you're still thinking in employee mindset. The truth was, Tyler didn't understand it either. He was just repeating buzzwords Ryan had taught him, hoping they would make him sound successful to people who didn't know enough to ask follow-up questions. The second level was a $200 strategy optimization session conducted over Zoom, where Ryan told Tyler exactly what he needed to hear. "You're the type of guy I'd invest in personally. You've got that rare combination of vision and drive that most people lack completely." Those words lit Tyler up like he'd just been knighted by royalty. In one sentence, this stranger had given my son something I'd been trying to give him his whole life: genuine validation and recognition of his potential. The difference was devastating and obvious to everyone except Tyler. I wanted him to earn real confidence through actual accomplishments, real skills, and meaningful contributions to the world. Ryan just sold him fake confidence for the price of a credit card payment. It was cheaper, faster, and required no personal growth whatsoever, which made it infinitely more appealing to someone who'd spent his entire adult life looking for shortcuts to success. Tyler began introducing himself at family gatherings as a digital entrepreneur specializing in client acquisition funnels and passive revenue optimization. When relatives asked what company he worked for or what products he sold, Tyler would launch into incomprehensible explanations about building systems that generate value while you sleep and leveraging other people's expertise to create multiple income streams. He'd learned to talk for 10 minutes without saying anything concrete, a skill Ryan had apparently mastered and passed on to his students. Over the following weeks, I watched Tyler disappear deeper into this fantasy world where normal rules didn't apply, and success was just one breakthrough away. He started waking up at 2 p.m. and staying awake until 4 a.m., pacing around his room while listening to motivational podcasts at maximum volume. He stopped eating the meals I prepared, claiming he was optimizing his energy intake with expensive protein powders and supplement combinations he'd ordered online using my Amazon account. Tyler began treating basic household responsibilities like they were beneath his new status as a high-value entrepreneur. When I asked him to contribute to rent, utilities, or groceries, he would lecture me about scarcity mindset and suggest that I should invest in his growth instead of thinking small. He'd say things like, "Once my systems are fully optimized, I'll be able to cover all our expenses and more, but right now, I need to focus on building rather than maintaining." The mentor kept posting videos about his private mastermind students, making 5 figures in their first 30 days, 6 figures within 6 months, and 7 figures within their first year. Tyler believed every single claim because he desperately needed to. He wasn't making a penny from any of this supposed business activity, but admitting that would mean admitting he'd been played by someone he'd never even met in person. Instead of facing reality, Tyler doubled down on the fantasy. I discovered later that he'd opened 3 different credit cards in his own name just to keep funding what he called his business education. But even maxing out his own credit wasn't enough to satisfy Ryan's endless appetite for more money. The mentor had a sophisticated system for gradually increasing the financial pressure on his victims, always dangling bigger promises just out of reach of their current payment level. That's when Tyler made the decision that would destroy our relationship forever. While I was sleeping one night, he used my saved banking information from an old laptop I'd let him borrow for his business research and wired $8,000 to a company called Elite Success Partners. When I confronted him the next morning, showing him the bank statements with my hands literally shaking from rage and betrayal, Tyler didn't apologize or show any signs of remorse. Instead, he smirked at me like I was the idiot in this situation. "It's a strategic investment in our family's future," he said with the kind of condescending patience you'd use to explain simple concepts to a particularly slow child. "You'll thank me when the money starts rolling, in triple what I invested." Tyler actually believed he was doing me a favor by stealing my life savings and giving it to a complete stranger on the internet. I didn't waste time trying to reason with someone who'd clearly lost all connection to reality. I called the bank immediately and filed a fraud report, then froze my accounts to prevent any additional theft. Tyler completely lost his mind when he realized his access to my money had been cut off. He accused me of sabotaging his future, stealing his opportunity, and being jealous of his success that existed only in his imagination and Ryan's promotional videos. "What success?" I asked him, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Show me $1 you've made from this business. Show me one real client, one actual product, one piece of evidence that any of this is real." Tyler couldn't answer because there was no answer. Instead, he started screaming about how I was trapped in employee mindset and would never understand entrepreneurial vision. That night, Tyler posted a video to his pathetic audience of maybe 60 followers, talking about how toxic family members try to sabotage high-value men who are brave enough to pursue their dreams. Watching my own son trash me publicly to a bunch of strangers was the moment I realized he wasn't just lost. He was actively choosing to drown rather than admit he needed help. Tyler genuinely believed Ryan cared about him as an individual. He thought this man who lived in rented luxury and sold overpriced courses to desperate young adults was going to personally mentor him to success. I'd watched Tyler recording voice messages to Ryan, pouring out his dreams and asking for specific advice like they were close friends. Of course, none of those messages ever received responses, but that didn't matter to Tyler. Just being allowed to send them made him feel important and connected to something bigger than himself. The final trap was set when Ryan announced an exclusive partnership opportunity for students who could demonstrate $10,000 in liquid capital. This was Tyler's golden ticket, his chance to prove he belonged in the inner circle of successful entrepreneurs rather than stuck with the masses of ordinary people grinding through traditional careers. For someone desperate to maintain his image as a rising business mogul, this felt like his last shot at validating everything he'd believed about his own potential. Tyler didn't have $10,000. He barely had $10. But that didn't stop him from finding ways to scrape together the money through every predatory lending app and cash advance service that would approve someone with his deteriorating credit score. He was going to make this payment even if it buried him financially, because admitting he couldn't afford it would mean admitting everything else had been an expensive delusion. What Tyler didn't realize was that Ryan had already planned his exit strategy from the very beginning. The mentor had been slowly preparing his audience for his disappearance, talking about leveling up to the next phase and transitioning to exclusive private coaching for only the most committed students. It all sounded exciting and exclusive at the time, but looking back, it was clearly a sophisticated way of explaining why he was about to vanish with everyone's money and never be seen again. The morning Ryan disappeared forever, Tyler was still floating on a cloud of manufactured confidence, pacing around our apartment in his bathrobe like he was preparing for the most important business meeting of his life. He kept repeating Ryan's latest voice memo like it was a prayer. This is your moment, kings. This is the investment that changes your bloodline forever. Tyler had just wired nearly $10,000 to something called Next Phase Capital, yet another company name that should have been a massive red flag to anyone thinking clearly. Ryan had promised Tyler confirmation by 9 a.m. sharp, and my son sat at the kitchen counter like a child waiting for Christmas morning, refreshing his email every 15 seconds and telling his girlfriend Madison, "They're going to announce my partnership promotion today. Everything we've been working toward is about to pay off." But Madison looked less impressed than usual, scrolling through her phone with the kind of distracted energy that comes from watching the same performance too many times. When Tyler asked her to film him opening the confirmation email for his social media content, Madison barely looked up from her screen. "Only if you actually get something real this time," she said with a tone that cut through Tyler's excitement like a knife. That should have been the first warning bell, but Tyler was too high on anticipation to hear it. He just laughed and said, "Get ready to film the moment our lives change forever." 9 o'clock came and went with nothing but silence. No email, no text, no phone call, no confirmation of any kind. Tyler started checking his spam folder, then his other email accounts, then different messaging apps, looking for any sign that Ryan's team was just running a little behind schedule. By 10 a.m., the first cracks of panic began showing in Tyler's voice as he muttered, "Time zones. Right. They're probably in Dubai or somewhere. The timing is just different." That's when Tyler decided to check the private Discord server for elite mastermind members, the exclusive group he'd been so proud to join after his first major payment. The server was gone, completely deleted. Not just empty, but erased from existence like it had never existed at all. Tyler refreshed the app multiple times, thinking it must be a technical glitch, but the horrible reality was starting to sink in. He tried the Telegram chat next, the one where Ryan's success coaches used to post daily motivational messages and answer questions from students. Empty. Every admin had been removed, every message wiped clean. Every trace of the community Tyler thought he belonged to had vanished overnight. Madison watched him frantically checking app after app, and I could see her putting the pieces together faster than Tyler was willing to. "Did you pay through a secure website?" Madison asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Tyler's response confirmed her worst fears. No, it was a private crypto wallet transfer. Ryan said it was more secure that way, less traceable by the government. Madison just stared at him without blinking, and I could practically see her mentally calculating how quickly she could pack her belongings and get out of this sinking ship. "Did you at least get a receipt or some kind of confirmation?" she pressed, though again, her expression suggested she knew what Tyler was going to say. "They don't do traditional receipts," Tyler explained with diminishing confidence. "It's all blockchain-based and encrypted for security purposes." Madison walked out of the room without another word, and Tyler followed her like a lost puppy, still trying to convince her that everything was fine. "It's just a timing issue," Tyler called after her as she headed toward the bedroom. "Ryan's operation is international now. They're probably dealing with different banking systems and regulatory requirements. This kind of delay is completely normal for high-level business transactions," but his voice was getting higher and more desperate with each word, like he was trying to convince himself as much as Madison. Tyler tried calling Ryan's phone number, the same number that had delivered encouraging voice memos and business advice for months. Straight to a disconnected voicemail message. He tried again, thinking maybe he'd dialed wrong. Still dead. The phone number that had once made Tyler feel like he had a direct line to success now gave him nothing but the cold reality of abandonment, desperate for any sign that this was just a misunderstanding. Tyler ran to his laptop and started searching for Ryan's social media accounts. His Instagram was gone, not just inactive or private, but completely deleted like it had never existed. His Twitter account had been wiped clean. His YouTube channel, with all those motivational videos Tyler had watched dozens of times, vanished without a trace. It was like Ryan Castellano had been erased from the internet entirely. Madison came back into the room carrying her suitcase, and the sight of it hit Tyler like a physical blow. "Are you saying this guy just ghosted you after taking 10 grand?" she asked with the kind of brutal directness that cuts through delusion like a hot knife through butter. Tyler's response was a masterclass in denial. "No, it's not like that. Ryan's probably just transitioning to the next phase of his operation. This is how successful people work. They evolve. They upgrade their systems. They move to higher levels." Madison looked at Tyler like he was made of glass, fragile, transparent, and about to shatter into a million pieces. Then she asked the question that made everything real. "You got scammed, didn't you?" Tyler couldn't answer because answering would mean accepting that everything he'd built over the past few months, the confidence, the identity, the dreams of success, was constructed on absolutely nothing. He sat down on the kitchen floor, not collapsed or crying, just empty like someone had pulled the plug on his soul and watched everything drain away. His mind was still frantically searching for explanations, loopholes, anything that would let him continue believing this was all part of some master plan. But the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Ryan had vanished completely, taking Tyler's money and leaving behind nothing but digital ghosts and broken promises. The worst part wasn't losing the money, though that was devastating enough. The worst part was realizing that Tyler had never been special, or chosen, or destined for greatness. He'd just been another mark in a long line of victims. Another desperate young man willing to pay thousands of dollars to feel important. Ryan had probably forgotten Tyler's name the moment the money cleared his account. Tyler opened his banking app and saw the full scope of his financial destruction for the first time. Negative balance across multiple accounts. Loan interest climbing daily on the cash advances he'd taken out. Credit cards maxed out with minimum payments he couldn't afford. No savings, no backup plan, no safety net except for the mother he'd just screamed at and thrown out of his life. Madison didn't make a dramatic exit. She didn't slam doors or throw things or deliver a devastating speech about what a fool Tyler had been. She just zipped up her suitcase, slung it over her shoulder, and said, "Good luck, Tyler," in the same tone you'd use to wish a stranger well at a bus stop, like she was talking to someone she wouldn't remember in a week. Tyler tried to stop her, but what could he say that he'd been right about Ryan all along, that the money would still come through, that this was all just a temporary setback in his journey to success? Even Tyler couldn't sell those lies anymore, not even to himself. Madison had seen enough to know that staying meant going down with a ship that was already underwater. After she left, Tyler sat alone in that apartment for the first time in months, and the silence was deafening. No more motivational podcasts playing in the background. No more voice memos from Ryan filling him with false confidence. No more girlfriend believing in his potential for greatness. Just Tyler, his maxed out credit cards, his unpaid bills, and the crushing weight of realizing he'd destroyed everything real in his life, chasing something that had never existed. For the first time since this nightmare began, Tyler couldn't pretend anymore. No more live streams about building empires. No more posts about cutting out toxic people. No more voice notes to mentors who'd never cared about him. Just bills, silence, and the awful sound of his own thoughts closing in like vultures circling a dying animal. Tyler thought about calling me, but my number was still blocked on his phone, blocked by his own choice when he'd decided I was holding him back from success. He'd burned that bridge so thoroughly that he didn't even know how to begin rebuilding it. And even if he could swallow his pride enough to reach out, what would he say? That he'd been wrong about everything, that he needed help, that the mother he'd told to drop dead was the only person left who might still care about him. The red blinking light on the internet router reminded him that the Wi-Fi bill was overdue. The empty refrigerator reminded him that he couldn't afford groceries. The stack of unopened mail in the corner reminded him that reality didn't care about his dreams or his excuses or his belief in his own potential. Reality only cared about what he could actually do. And right now, Tyler couldn't do anything except sit in the wreckage of his own making and wonder how he'd lost everything so completely. For the first time in his life, Tyler understood what it meant to be truly alone, not by accident or circumstance, but by choice, his choice. The day he told his mother to drop dead was the day he killed the last person who would have stayed with him through anything. Now he was learning what the world looked like without that safety net, and it was a lesson that was going to cost him everything he had left. Madison didn't slam the door when she left Tyler sitting in that kitchen, surrounded by the ruins of his delusions. She didn't scream about being lied to, or throw his belongings into the hallway, or deliver some devastating speech about what a fool he'd been. She just zipped up her designer suitcase, slung it over her shoulder like she was heading out for a weekend trip, and said, "Good luck, Tyler," in the same casual tone you'd use to wish a stranger well at a coffee shop. That indifferent goodbye hurt worse than any dramatic breakup scene could have, because it meant she'd already written him off as someone not worth getting emotional about. Tyler sat there on that cold kitchen floor with his laptop still open, watching the screen slowly dim as the battery died, a perfect metaphor for everything else in his life. For the first time in months, he couldn't hide behind motivational content or fake business calls or voice memos to imaginary mentors. There was just Tyler, his maxed out credit cards, his empty bank accounts, and the crushing silence of a man who'd systematically destroyed every relationship that mattered. He kept thinking Madison would come back once she'd had time to cool off and process what had happened. Maybe she just needed space to understand that this was a temporary setback, not a permanent failure. But when Tyler opened the refrigerator looking for something to eat, her organic Greek yogurt cups were gone. When he checked the bathroom, her expensive skincare products had vanished. Even her backup phone charger had disappeared from the bedside table. Madison hadn't just walked out in anger. She'd been planning this exit for days, maybe weeks, just waiting for the perfect moment when Tyler's fantasy finally collapsed completely. The first night alone hit Tyler like a freight train, loaded with consequences he'd never seen coming. He tried to sleep but couldn't, his mind racing with everything that had gone wrong and everyone he'd lost. The red blinking light on the internet router mocked him with overdue payment warnings. The apartment felt colder, smaller, like the walls were closing in on what remained of his dignity. He kept glancing at the door, half expecting someone to knock, a friend, a neighbor, hell, even a bill collector would have been human contact. But Tyler had systematically alienated everyone who'd ever cared about him over the past few months. The old friends he'd called broke-minded and trapped in employee mindset weren't returning his texts now that he needed them. The co-workers he'd looked down on for having regular jobs had blocked him on social media after one too many condescending posts about entrepreneurship and financial freedom. Even distant relatives had stopped engaging with his content once it became clear he was more interested in lecturing them about their limiting beliefs than maintaining actual relationships. In the corner of his bedroom sat a shoebox full of unopened mail he'd been ignoring for weeks, all those low-frequency responsibilities that Ryan had taught him to dismiss as distractions from building wealth. Tyler finally forced himself to open them, and the numbers hit him like a series of physical blows. One credit card statement showed his balance had jumped from $2,500 to $3,800 in just 2 weeks, thanks to compound interest and late fees. Another warned that he had 7 days before the account went to collections, and his credit score would be destroyed permanently. The panic wasn't the explosive kind that makes you scream and fight back. It was the slow, acid burn of realizing you're drowning in deep water with no one left to throw you a life preserver. Tyler tried calling his bank to see if they could reverse any of the transfers to Ryan's various companies, but the customer service representative explained that once money leaves your account voluntarily, even if you were tricked into sending it, it's gone forever. When Tyler asked about disputing the charges as fraud, they pointed out that he'd authorized every single transaction himself. Tyler tried reaching out to other people who'd been in Ryan's program, hoping to find allies or at least confirmation that he wasn't the only victim of this elaborate scam. But the Discord server was gone. The Telegram groups had been wiped clean, and Ryan's social media followers seemed to have evaporated like they'd never existed. Tyler began to understand that most of Ryan's successful students had probably been fake accounts created to provide social proof for new marks like himself. By the second day of his new reality, things got exponentially worse. Tyler received an official eviction notice from the apartment management company. Rent was 3 weeks overdue, and they wanted full payment plus late fees within 72 hours, or he'd be physically removed by the sheriff's department. Tyler had never handled those boring adult responsibilities. I'd always taken care of utilities, insurance, and rent, while he focused on his entrepreneurial vision. He used to roll his eyes when I reminded him about due dates, treating my financial responsibility like it was somehow beneath his status as a future business mogul. Tyler tried to pawn his camera equipment, the same professional setup he'd used to film all those motivational videos about success and abundance. The pawn shop owner, a grizzled man who'd probably seen every sob story imaginable, offered him $40 for the entire collection. "Old model," the man said with a dismissive shrug. Nobody wants this stuff anymore. Everyone just uses their phones now. Tyler took the money anyway and spent it on instant ramen and gasoline, luxuries that felt like necessities when you're living in your car. He'd stopped posting on social media completely, unable to maintain the facade of success when his life was falling apart in real time. The moment he went silent, people started to notice, but not in the way he'd hoped. A few followers sent concerned messages asking if he was okay, but most just unfollowed when the daily motivation stopped flowing. His engagement dropped to 0. His comments disappeared, and his dreams of becoming a successful influencer died with a whimper rather than the bang he'd always imagined. On day 4, Tyler hit what he thought was rock bottom, but discovered the hole went much deeper than he'd ever imagined. He remembered my emergency cash stash, $200 I'd kept taped behind the kitchen drawer for real emergencies like car repairs or medical bills. Tyler ripped it out without hesitation, without guilt, without even thinking about what it represented. That money was supposed to be our family's last resort, but Tyler spent it on food, gas, and one final desperate subscription to a new scammer who promised cryptocurrency recovery strategies for people who'd been burned by previous investments. Tyler knew it was another con, but part of him still clung to the toxic hope that one lucky break could fix everything he'd destroyed. He was like a gambling addict at a casino, convinced that the next hand would win back everything he'd lost, even though the house always wins in the end. The rational part of his brain had shut down completely, leaving only desperation and the kind of magical thinking that keeps people feeding money into machines specifically designed to take everything they have. That night, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, Tyler finally said the words out loud that he'd been avoiding for weeks. I used her, not as an apology or a confession to anyone else, but as a simple statement of fact that he could no longer deny. He'd used me for money, for labor, for emotional support, for housing, for someone to blame when things went wrong. Every time he'd failed at something, I'd been there to soften the landing. Every time he'd gotten angry or frustrated with his own shortcomings, I'd absorbed the impact and kept loving him anyway. The worst part wasn't that I was gone. It was the growing realization that I was clearly thriving without him. Tyler had spent 30 minutes scrolling through my LinkedIn profile earlier that day, torturing himself with photos of me at my new job, smiling with coworkers, holding a welcome back cupcake at some office celebration. I looked peaceful, in a way I never had when Tyler was around, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders the moment he told me to drop dead. I'd moved on without even looking back, while Tyler was falling apart in an apartment he couldn't afford, eating ramen noodles for every meal and dodging calls from debt collectors. I was building something new and healthy with people who valued my contributions, who noticed when I was having a good day, who celebrated small victories with me. Tyler realized he'd never been that kind of person for me, even though I'd been exactly that kind of person for him his entire life. By the end of the week, the electricity was cut off without warning, just a loud clunk from the breaker box outside, and then complete darkness and silence. No refrigerator humming, no lights, no internet connection to the outside world. The cold crept in immediately, along with the sour smell of food rotting in the powerless appliance. Tyler sat in that darkness for a long time, maybe hoping the power would magically restore itself. But nothing happened except the steady decay of everything around him. When he called the electric company from his dying cell phone, they explained that his account was flagged for non-payment and had been sent to collections. He promised he could pay next week, but they said next week wasn't good enough for someone who owed 3 months of back payments plus penalties and fees. Tyler hung up and drove to a gas station to charge his phone, sitting in the parking lot like a homeless person, watching the battery percentage crawl upward at an agonizingly slow pace. He hadn't eaten real food in 2 days. The instant noodles were gone, the pantry was completely empty, and his stomach felt like it was consuming itself from the inside. Tyler pulled into a McDonald's drive-thru and tried his debit card, declined due to insufficient funds. He tried a backup credit card, also declined because he'd maxed it out weeks ago. That's when the full weight of his situation finally crushed him completely. He didn't have low funds or a tight budget. He had absolutely nothing left. Tyler started calling people he hadn't spoken to in years, hoping someone would remember him fondly enough to offer help. His cousin Jake, who used to crash on our couch during college breaks. A guy named Marcus from high school, who'd once offered him a job washing cars at his family's dealership. Even an old roommate he'd stiffed on rent before moving back home with me. Nobody answered their phones, and the few who did return his calls gave him the same polite brush-off. Damn, man, I wish I could help, but things are really tight right now. Nobody offered him a place to sleep. Nobody offered cash or even a free meal. Nobody offered so much as a ride to the unemployment office. They all remembered how Tyler had acted when he thought he was on top of the world. Arrogant, condescending, constantly posting about cutting unsuccessful people out of his life. The social media posts he'd made about abandoning low-value individuals were coming back to haunt him like ghosts of his own making. Tyler went back to the apartment and found an orange eviction notice taped to the door. Final warning, 3 days to pay everything he owed or be physically removed by law enforcement. He ripped it down and crumpled it up, but the legal language was burned into his brain forever. He spent that night sleeping in his car, parked 3 blocks away so none of the neighbors would witness how far the successful entrepreneur had fallen. He couldn't sleep in that cramped space, just stared at the fabric ceiling and tried to remember the last time he'd felt truly safe and secure. He used to think being alone meant independence, freedom, the ability to make decisions without anyone else's input or judgment. Now it felt like being buried alive, suffocated by the weight of consequences he'd created entirely through his own choices. The next day, Tyler tried applying for delivery jobs with various app-based services, but his background check was flagged due to identity mismatches from the fraudulent credit applications he'd submitted months earlier. They said he could clear up the discrepancies, but it might take several weeks of paperwork and verification. Tyler didn't have several weeks. He barely had several hours before his next crisis hit. The hunger was becoming a constant, gnawing presence that affected his ability to think clearly. Tyler started pocketing sugar packets from gas stations and filling his stomach with water, telling himself this was just temporary, just a brief dip before his inevitable comeback. But every time he tried to open his phone and create motivational content, his hands would shake from malnutrition and his voice would crack from dehydration. He couldn't fake confidence anymore when he looked like someone who'd been living in his car for a week. The mask had been ripped away completely, leaving only the raw truth of what happens when you burn every bridge and bet everything on a lie. Tyler's followers had stopped checking his accounts. His engagement had dropped to 0, and even the spam bots had moved on to more active targets. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small but growing voice kept whispering the truth he wasn't ready to face. The day he told his mother to drop dead was the day he killed the last person who would have stayed with him through anything. Now he was learning what it meant to face the world completely alone. and it was a lesson that was going to cost him everything he had left, including his pride. Tyler didn't plan to show up at my door that cold Tuesday morning. It just happened, like muscle memory pulling him back to the last place on earth that had ever felt like safety. Except this time, he stood outside like a stranger who wasn't sure he had the right to knock. He hadn't eaten a real meal in almost 2 days, hadn't slept more than an hour at a time in his car, and hadn't spoken to anyone who looked at him like he mattered in over a week. Standing there on my front porch, staring at the door he'd slammed behind me just 1 month earlier, Tyler could only think about the last time he'd seen my face, the way I'd looked at him after he screamed those poisonous words, after he told me to drop dead. What haunted him wasn't his own rage or cruelty. It was my smile, that calm, quiet smile I'd given him as I picked up my purse and walked out of his life. He couldn't understand that smile at the time. It had felt like mockery, like I was laughing at his pain. But now, broken and desperate on my doorstep, Tyler finally understood what that expression meant. It wasn't anger or fear or even sadness. It was closure. It was the look of someone who'd already let go, who'd been preparing for that moment long before he'd worked up the courage to push me away. Tyler tried to knock twice, but couldn't make his hand connect with the wood. What could he possibly say that would matter? Sorry felt too small for the damage he'd caused. Help felt too selfish after everything he'd put me through. He stood there for 20 minutes, rehearsing conversations in his head, but nothing sounded right coming from someone who'd thrown away the most unconditional love he'd ever known. Finally, Tyler sat down on the step and leaned against the door, like maybe I could feel his presence through the wood, like maybe I'd sense the weight of his regret and open up without him having to find the words. But I didn't come to the door, even though he knew I was home. My car was in the driveway, the porch light was on, and he could hear the soft sounds of life continuing inside, dishes clinking, television murmuring, the comfort of a world that no longer included him. That silence was his consequence. And Tyler finally understood that some apologies have to be earned through more than just words. As he sat there until the streetlights came on, shivering in the cold and facing the full weight of what he destroyed, Tyler realized this wasn't just about getting help or finding shelter. This was about proving he could become someone worth forgiving again. Here's something I learned the hard way after watching my son nearly destroy himself, chasing someone else's definition of success. The people who love you unconditionally aren't holding you back from greatness. They're the foundation that makes real greatness possible. Tyler got so caught up in the fantasy of instant wealth and status that he forgot the most basic truth about building anything meaningful in life. Success without the people who matter is just expensive loneliness. All the money in the world can't buy back the trust you break, the love you reject, or the bridges you burn while chasing dreams that turn out to be lies. I spent years watching Tyler struggle to find his place in the world, and my heart broke every time he failed at something new. But what I didn't realize was that by always softening his landings, by always being there to clean up his messes, I was accidentally teaching him that consequences weren't real, and that my love was something he could take for granted forever. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is let them fail completely, not because you want them to suffer, but because real growth only happens when the safety net is gone and they have to learn to catch themselves. The smile I gave Tyler when he told me to drop dead wasn't cruel. It was the moment I finally loved him enough to let him face the results of his own choices. If there's someone in your life right now who's taking your love for granted, remember this: setting boundaries isn't giving up on them. It's giving them the chance to discover what they're truly capable of when they can't lean on your strength anymore. And if you're the one who's been pushing away the people who love you most, please understand that pride is the most expensive thing you'll ever own. The people who stick with you through your failures, who celebrate your small victories, who love you even when you're not particularly lovable, those people are your real treasure. Don't trade them for fool's gold, no matter how shiny the promises look from the outside. What's one relationship in your life that you know you've been taking for granted? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes admitting it out loud is the first step toward making things right. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more real-life lessons about love, loss, and the courage it takes to rebuild what we've broken. Your support means everything to creators like me who are trying to share authentic stories in a world full of fake promises.